Hey, this is Joe Hubbard from JoeHubbardBassVideos.com, coming at you today with Lesson 2 of my Functional Diatonic Harmony course. This particular lesson is on diatonic substitutions in a major key. So grab your bass and let's get started. Let's review. When we harmonized the major scale, we came up with 7 different chords. 3 of those chords we used to create the 2-5-1 progression. Now what we're going to get into in this lesson is how the 4 remaining chords function as substitutes for the 2 minor 7, 5 7, and 1 major 7 chords. Before I get into explaining about how these diatonic substitutions work, it's important to look at the 2-5-1 in order of importance and then understand how to group these chords together into different categories so we understand how they function. Now the 1 major 7th chord, which is also called the tonic, is where all harmonic progressions point to. When it is preceded by its dominant 7th chord, or the 5/7 chord, the strongest resolution or conclusion is implied. Now the 2 minor 7th chord, which is also called subdominant, is the most common chord to precede the 5/7 chord. This is often thought of as a leading chord to set up that 5-to-1 resolution that we have in Western music. Now, in order to understand how the remaining diatonic chords built off of the major scale function, we must group them together, relating them to either the 2 minor 7, the 5/7, or the 1 major 7th chords. This is broken down into 3 different categories: tonic, subdominant, and dominant. Now stay with me. Once we've established that the 1 major 7th is part of the tonic group, the 2 minor 7th is part of the subdominant group, and the 5/7 is part of the dominant group, now what we need to do is start to add the diatonic substitutions so we can see how they align with all 3 of those categories. So if we take the first group, which is the tonic group, this starts with the 1 major 7th chord. And what we're going to add to this is 3 minor 7th and 6 minor 7th. We move along to the subdominant group, which starts with 2 minor 7th. And what we're going to add as a diatonic substitution to this is 4 major 7th. If we then go to the dominant group, which starts with 5/7, then we're going to add the diatonic substitution to that, which is 7 minor 7 flat 5. As with everything that we study, we need to understand how these chords sound in relation to how they function, either as a tonic, subdominant, or dominant chord. If we take the group of tonic chords, we need to understand that these chords have a resting quality. They actually sound as though they've resolved somewhere. Whereas if you take the subdominant group of chords, these chords sound restless, and they actually sound as though they want to move towards another chord within the harmonic progression that you're listening to. The dominant group of chords sound unresolved and really have a tendency to want to pull to sort of resolve to the tonic of the key. At this juncture, I want to point out an important addendum to the major 7th chord. Major 7th chords can be interchangeable with major 6 chords. They're actually the same chord, it just has a bit of a different color to either the major 7th chord or the major 6th chord. If I take the major 7th chord, I have root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. If I have the major 6th chord, I have the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 6th. And it doesn't matter whether you're playing the major 7th or the major 6th chord within it functioning as a 1 chord of a key, because they both work. Again, it's just a color thing, and it's usually down to a stylistic interpretation of the music you're playing. For instance, in pop and rock generically, you're more likely to hear a major 6 chord. In jazz, you're more likely to hear a major 7th chord, although those are generic examples. And one thing that we need to understand is that if we're playing a lot of pop music and a lot of rock stuff, that 9 times out of 10 when you're playing a 1 chord, you want to extend the root 3rd and the 5th to the 6th, not the 7th. That will give you that real commercial sound and feel that you're looking to get. Diatonic substitution works with the chords within each group, tonic, subdominant, and dominant, share common notes between them. There's only 2 concepts used for diatonic substitution. That's what I call the 3, 5, 7, and 9 theory, and then chord inversions. What we're going to do is start with the subdominant group of chords. This is 2 minor 7th, and the diatonic substitution is 4 major 7th. And what we need to do is really explain why this is a diatonic substitution, and it really is all about the common tones that are shared between the 2 chords. Now, if I take a 2 minor 7th in the key of C, I'm going to have D minor 7. And then if I play the 4 major 7 on top of that, I'm going to have this here, which is F major 7 in the key of C. So if we analyze the notes in relation to both chords, what we've got is the root, the 3, the 5, the 7th of the D minor 7. And then if I take that root, 3, 5, and 7 and analyze how that relates to the D minor 7th chord, I've got the 3, the 5, the 7, and the 9. And that's what I mean by the 3, 5, 7, and 9 theory. The substitution is often the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, and the 9th of the original chord that we started with. So what's important about this is understanding that I can use this to extend my melodic and harmonic ideas as I'm playing. So if I had a D minor 7th chord, I could substitute an F major 7th chord on top of it, but I could also, as a composer, and this is very important for you as a bass player to be recognizing harmonic progressions. As a composer, I could write this in. So instead of writing a 2 chord, I could put it as a 4 chord, as a substitution to maybe make the harmonic progression a little bit more interesting. So if we then move on to the 5/7 chord, in C I've got G7. And then 7 minor 7 flat 5. In C is going to be B minor 7 flat 5. So I've got the root, the 3, the 5, the 7 of the G7. And then this is the root, the 3, the 5, and the 7 of the B minor 7 flat 5. But if I analyze those notes in relation to the G7, I'm going to have the 3, the 5, the 7, and the 9. So this also applies to the 3, 5, 7, and 9 theory to the original chord. Okay, if I go to the 1 major 7th chord, in C I've got C major 7. And then the diatonic substitute is 3 minor 7. And this again follows this 3, 5, 7, and 9 theory, because the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th of the E minor 7 is the 3, the 5, the 7, and the 9 of that C major 7 chord. Okay? If we then go to the major 6 chord, okay, remember we talked a little bit about that major 6 chord. I've got C, E, G, A, or the root, the 3, the 5, and then the 6. Okay? If I take that 6 and bring it down 1 octave, it gives me A, C, E, and G. And this forms an A minor 7th chord. Okay, so I can also use this 6 minor 7th over the 1 chord, okay, and specifically over the C major 6. But because those chords are interchangeable, remember we talked about that, they're really the same chord, just a different color. I can now substitute both of the E minor 7 and the A minor 7 over either a C major 7th or a C major 6. It doesn't matter. So for the 1 chord, we have those 2 chords, which is 3 minor 7 and 6 minor 7. And we need to understand how that works. That's a very important part of this diatonic substitution when we're talking about the one chord. This often leads people into sort of a confused state. But that's pretty clear, and I want you to go back and really practice these things and really start to memorize this now. You're going to have to commit a lot of this to memory. A lot of it just takes busy work. Just repetition is the key to memorization. Get this down in every key, come back, and I'm going to have some more stuff for you. The value of diatonic substitution is that it provides you with a safe diatonic choice of alternative chords, as opposed to chord substitutions that include chromatic tones requiring a specific discipline between instruments. Now what I want you to do is really practice memorizing the diatonic substitutions in every key. In order to do that, be sure to download the PDF worksheet attached to this lesson so you can start getting busy. The following exercise will enable you to start hearing how to extend your melodic and harmonic vocabulary when playing over a set of simple chord changes. I want you to notice and pay particularly close attention to how we're working in these diatonic substitutions over the 2-5-1 progression. So if we start with D minor 7, I'm going to play the arpeggio, and then on top of that I'm going to play the F major 7, with a diatonic substitute on top of it to extend my line to the 9. Then we go to the G7, I'm going to arpeggiate that chord, and then on top of that I'm going to extend it to the 9 by playing the B minor 7 flat 5 chord. Then I go to the 1 major 7 chord, which is C major 7, and then I extend that by playing the E minor 7, and then on top of that the A minor 7. So the whole exercise is going to sound like this. Demonstrate this exercise over a backing track. The progression to this track is very similar to what we did on the last lesson. It's a 2-5-1 progression moving down in whole steps. Now what I want you to do when practicing this exercise initially is really take in the information within your brain and really understand what you're doing. When you're playing over the 2 chord, understand what the chord is and then what the diatonic substitute is. Understand that you're using that diatonic substitute to extend the 2 chord to its 9th. And then you do the same with the 5-7 chord and the same with the 1 chord. You need to be able to do this on the fly while transitioning between keys. So rather than just sitting down and aimlessly playing along with the backing track with no real intention, I want you to first really internalize all this information so you really know what you're doing. The next thing that you might run into is a few range issues with your bass. But when you get there, just adjust those where applicable. today's lesson, but before we go, let's take a look at what we've learned. In today's lesson, we've learned how the remaining diatonic chords built from the major scale work as substitution chords for the 2 minor 7, 5 7, and 1 major 7th chords. We've also learned how all diatonic substitution is based on only two principles, the 3, 5, 7, and 9 theory and chord inversions. We then learned how these substitution chords function in either the tonic, subdominant, or dominant group of chords, and then we learned how to use them melodically in bass lines and solos. As always, practice smart, work hard, and play creatively. I'll catch up with you next week for Lesson 3. Take care.